The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
Well, it is my pleasure to have you here. Welcome. I'm going to introduce Michelle first and then Trey. Michelle, I try to find some interesting thing on the interwebs about people, and then I reveal them here before the presentation. Some of this may or may not be true, not sure, but I do believe you are. Michelle, is it Gaillard?
Close enough. Gaillard.
How to say it again?
Gaillard.
Gaillard. Oh, I tried to get fancy. Gaillard, Area Vice President and Director of Private Equity and M&A at AJG Gallagher, with an emphasis around risk management and cyber. And so it's appropriate that you're here. Look like before this, you had a long background in commercial banking. And one thing I found out that I think was kind of super, you are a super volunteer in the community. Lots of industry groups and local civic organizations up in the Upstate, including some financial literacy volunteering. And I think this is true. I think you are an Hotlanta native. Is that true?
That is true. You did dig deep.
Bam.
I'm impressed.
Trey, how are you doing today, sir?
It depends on what you are about to ask me.
Presidente of Craig, which is not your name. It stands for Cyber Risk Analysis Group. And you also had a background in banking and also industry, as an example, long stint at Michelin. I think you got your undergraduate degree at the great university, Clemson, with a degree in marketing. Is that true?
That is correct. Go Tigers.
And I believe you were very active in your university, including as participated in the newspaper.
Oh, man.
You would write, you were an editorial and write articles on hard-hitting topics such as, is money really all that matters? Is it, Trey, all that really matters?
It might need to be after you showing that online. Yes. So
it's a good
way to dig deep on that. I haven't seen that in 20 years. So
I'll let you take back over and present the actual presentation. You were also a super volunteer in the Greenville area. I saw a long list of civic and industry and faith-based organizations where you volunteer your time, including the Greenville Fellows. And I also saw a little bit of speaking and writing. So a little bit of everything.
absolutely.
All right, Trey, I'm looking forward to your presentation. I'll give you a second to bring it back up. And thank you. I'm going to mute myself and I'll hit you with a few hard-hitting questions after Michelle kind of hits that half point.
Sure. Well, thank you, Robert, for the introductions. And you certainly did dig deep. That was very interesting. But thanks again. We wanted to talk today about cybersecurity from a risk management perspective. And I appreciate Michelle participating as well and getting her insights on the insurance side of the equation. Right out of the gate, I want to be upfront. I absolutely am here to sell your audience on something. I want to sell them on the idea that cyber threats are much worse than just what you see in the headlines, hence the iceberg picture here. There is far more below the surface than what you get to read about in the newspapers. The dark web is a real place. It's actually an industry that exists and is designed to ruin your livelihood, whether you're a business or an individual. There is an entire industry out there. And so for today, just to kind of get us started, instead of telling you that, I thought I would show it to you. I had our team visit the dark web very recently and pull some screenshots. So I'm not sure if your audience has ever had the opportunity to actually see what the dark web looks like, but I'm going to show you some examples. So just to get started, one thing you should notice is that the dark web is such an industry that it is almost becoming Amazon-like. You can now get to the opportunity to change your college grades, add them to your shopping cart. You can hack somebody's emails. Again, add that to your shopping cart. If you want to hack someone's Facebook page, it's right there for the taking. If you want to hack a database or track someone, you can do that. You can just click, buy, add, and off you go. This is a price list from a hacker's website. It's probably a little hard for your audience to see in this view, so I added some of the prices on the left there. If you want to remotely destroy someone's iPhone, it'll cost you $400. If you want to edit your credit report or someone else's, that's going to cost you a little bit more, $1,500. If you want to destroy a server, if you want to attack a company, you're talking about $500 here. And if you want to install ransomware into a corporation, that's going to run you about $3,000. Again, this is just one example, but these lists are public to the dark web. They are available for all to see. Here is the opportunity to rent a hacker. You can rent this person to go and do damage to friends, family, neighbors, or corporations. You can see some of the quotes on the left. Have a lot of experience inside big organizations and big corporations. If you want to ruin your opponent, you're a business, I can ruin them financially or get them arrested. So these almost function like resumes on the dark web. And sort of the methodology for many of these hackers is to demonstrate and to kind of prove that they can do what they say they can do. And again, you can even see at the bottom a shopping cart sort of interface here if you want to rent this hacker. Here's a site that shows, that truly is sort of a resume that shows companies that they have hacked. And I'll show you a list here in a second. But this site shows companies that did not want to cooperate with us. And they are about to expose and give access to corporate information pretty much with a click of a button. So you can see a long running list of corporations they've hacked. They list them here, again, almost like a resume, so that other hackers can see that these guys mean business and they can do what they say they can do. Here is another site. You can, again, hire this team of hackers. This one is primarily focused on corporate vulnerabilities. And the interesting thing to take note here is sort of the psychology behind some of these hackers. These guys actually sort of see it as doing you a favor by hacking your company. They're going to tell you all the vulnerabilities that you have. Now, to fix those vulnerabilities and to get your information back, you have to pay them. You have to pay them a ransom, but they're doing you a favor. They're here to help you. They're just letting you know that your company had vulnerabilities that they could exploit. Here is what it looks like to see a full index of a company's files available on the dark web. Our team actually went to this site and clicked on some of these links, but everything from banking information for this company, credit card compliance, there are contracts with clients, human resource files. We actually saw employee addresses, phone numbers, even fathers and maiden names buried in there, 401k files. We even saw Christmas party plans for this company in just a couple of years ago. So everything that you have on your company servers, available on your network, this company is fully exposed here. Here's a site that shows ransomware as part of, in this example, they hacked a college campus. And here the evidence is posting, you can't see it here, we blocked it out, but posting copies of key employees' passports as verification, sort of proof of work. Here's another visual of, here's 27 index files many, many gigabytes of files available for this engineering company that were exposed just a month or so ago. And look, it's nothing personal, it's strictly business. That's this hacker's motto. So this company is fully exposed. You can click on any of these links and get into many of the files that I described just a minute ago. Again, here's another wall of successful attacks by hackers displaying this for their notoriety and building their credibility. You can see maybe the takeaway here is the comment at the very top. We negotiate directly in the chat room. Calls and emails you may receive only in an informal way, and this is not a place for negotiation. That's usually how ransomware negotiations take place. Here's another example. These are finance reports, probably very relevant for your audience today, but just as you can see, these get posted online. Sometimes they get posted as a demonstration for what the hackers can accomplish, but a lot of times they're posted for sale. And then here's a very large manufacturer, US-based manufacturer. Again, files exposed sort of in a different format here. Everything from product catalogs, location lists of warehouses, employee database, quantities, prices of their products. And again, probably the final takeaway here, their comment, this company doesn't care about its customers, it ignored their security. So you can see here, the risk is not only the ransomware payment potentially, but also the reputational risk associated with your company being hacked and exposed for all to see on the dark web. This slide right here is probably the final example. This was in the news recently. This is an example of AI, which is in all the headlines right now, but AI was able to clone a teenage girl's voice and called her mother to request a ransom payment, and it was all AI. They sampled the girl's voice from something she had done on social media. And the takeaway here is that I think this is kind of where the future is going. It is not going to be long before your CFOs receive a call from their CEO asking them to change payment instructions on a wire or something like that. And it's not the CEO, it's actually AI sampling that CEO's voice from some talk that they gave a few months ago. So the world is moving forward lightning fast. These threats are very, very real, and they are hard to keep up with. So that's kind of the analogy here, is that a lot of companies that we talk with sort of feel like they're in sort of this bubble, this fishbowl, and they're protected just because they only work in one state, they only work in one market. They don't work in an industry that any hacker would want access to. Well, most of these threats are moving downstream. And the reality is that many of these small middle market companies are actually in a much more dangerous situation than they even know. They can't really see the threats that are bubbling up and lurking below the surface. And so that's sort of the purpose of our call today. So if you buy into that idea that I'm trying to sell you, that these threats are much more significant and much more criminal than you can expect, then you got to do something about it. And so today, the topic is, what is the right risk management strategy? And I think what Michelle and I want to do for your audience today is kind of give them a template for maybe kind of a holistic view of risk management when it comes to cybersecurity. And I would put that in three categories, sort of a 3-point defense. And we're going to walk through those three areas that clients need to figure out how to synchronize between all three areas of the company. The first is you want to maximize the benefits and the tools and the systems that your bank gives you to prevent fraud. The second is you want to maximize the ability to transfer some of your cyber risk to insurance, and Michelle is going to help touch on that subject. And I'll come back and talk about some of the technical elements of cybersecurity controls, but something even more prevalent than that I think needs to be decided for clients beforehand. So quickly, when it comes to banking, as you mentioned in your intro, Michelle and I are both former bankers. We feel very passionate about this. We have personally sold cash management and treasury management tools to clients to prevent fraud. And the message today, we're not going to get into all the technical details of what those services are. I guess the takeaway for your audience today is they need to be maximizing the tools that their bank offers them to digitize things like payments and put those policies in place, those fraud control policies, and use and incorporate those bank tools into their ecosystem. If you're not doing that, I would say you are not taking some of these threats seriously. And if you don't have a resource, if you don't feel like your bank is a good partner to do so, feel free to get in touch with Michelle and I. We are happy to connect you to good bankers who we know are passionate about this and have the right tools to help clients digitize payments, protect payments, and protect their ecosystem. Michelle is a good banker. She was a good banker, and I'll turn it over to her to talk about the insurance.
All right. Thank you, Trey. So now that everyone has seen the underlyings of how this data is transitioned amongst criminals, I think the key takeaway is this is a profession for hackers. They're not doing this on the side. This isn't their weekend work. This is where they spend day in and day out trying to compromise your systems. So a study was done last year, and as you'll see on the page here, on average, a hacker sits in a system for 207 days before they are discovered. What that means is in that period of time, they're reading your emails, they're gathering access to your files, your financials. But even more than that, they're learning how you talk amongst your team. They're learning who your key partners are. Who is your attorney? Who is your accountant? Who is your banker? They're figuring out how they can act like you. And it takes another 70 days on average once this breach has been discovered to contain it. So before you even recognize there's a problem, they're in the shadows of your system, learning everything they can. So this affects so many things. Mergers and acquisitions is a very key topic right now for many companies. They're looking at bringing in private equity due to the cost of capital. Private equity groups are being very diligent with checking systems before they go into executing a contract, because they don't want to buy into your company and chance there being this risk lurking in the shadows. So it's so much about what's happened, in the past versus what's even happening today. When we think about things like reps and warranty insurance, which is very common on the mergers and acquisition side, that coverage will not cover any type of breach that's been determined to have happened before your letter of intent. So again, that 200-day window is really key when we think about where are your risks right now. Trey, if you'll go to the next, please. So, what is at stake here? What really matters? Why should you care about any type of cyber exposure? Well, one, it's reputational damage. When we think about enterprise value, which your banker has probably talked with you about, your company's worth more than just your assets. It's worth the reputation that you've built within your industry. So when word gets out that your systems have been hacked due to lack of controls, whether that's system or employee-based, all of a sudden your reputation is going to take a hit, and that enterprise value is going to be reduced, based off of that. You're also running the risk of losing clients. When a client hears that you exposed their data to hackers, they're probably not going to be a big fan of that. They're going to have concerns. What did they get? What type of information were they able to gain from that hack? How do we need to be concerned, and what are the activities we need to now take as a result of that? You've also got just downtime. As a manufacturer, if your product line is driven by technology, their ability to stop that product line in its tracks and manufacturing just ceases. that's detrimental. If you think about your top line revenue and divide that by 365 days of production, you can quickly tell that, the ransom payment may be the least of your concerns. It may be the revenue that you lose day in and day out from an inability to produce your product. But then there's also the potential litigation, right? What if your client sues you because their information was compromised? What if a supplier sues you because their trade secrets were exposed through this? We're working with a situation right now where a company was hacked. One of our clients' data was exposed. So this has been ongoing litigation. We're 2 years in, and at this stage, the litigation cost for our client has been over $270,000. So you think about cyber limits and you go, well, gosh, if I'm going to buy cyber, I'm going to spend maybe $1 million. You get $1 million limit. Surely that'll be sufficient. Well, when you're talking about litigation costs of, a number like that, then all of a sudden that $1 million doesn't seem so, doesn't seem like enough, which is where your partnership really becomes important, is having access to benchmarking, understanding what companies in your industry and of your revenue size are buying. What do I need? Let's be more scientific about determining cyber limits rather than just loving the round numbers of 1 million, 5 million. No, what is really necessary for our company? And I'll tell you a little broker tip. It's not just about having any type of cyber coverage. It's really about understanding what that gives you. I ask everybody on the phone to think about this. Let's say that you get an email and the hacker says, I've taken over your system and your ransom payment is $1 million. You have 4 hours to make a payment. Pause. What do? Who are you going to call? Are you going to call your banker? They can help you protect your cash, but that may not be where the exposure is. Are you going to call your CPA? They can tell you about the legal stuff, but they can't tell you what to do next. When you're buying cyber protection, you're getting so much more than just a ransom payment limit. You're getting access to expertise. So for example, with Gallagher, when you have us as your broker partner, you get access to a cyber hotline. You literally pick up the phone and you call Michelle and you say, Michelle, oh my gosh, I just got this email. I immediately put you in contact with our cyber team. All they do day in and day out is negotiate with hackers. They can tell you immediately what you need to do, what systems to close down. When do you power off your computer? When do you leave them powered on? What are the things that you need to do in the first 30 minutes, the first hour, the first day to control as much as possible? And then they negotiate with the hackers on your behalf. This isn't like negotiating for buying a house or a car. You guys, this is literally negotiating millions and millions of dollars of exposure. You want somebody holding that phone call that's done this before. And I don't know about you guys, but it's not me, right? It's not your typical CFO or CEO. So that's what's important to cyber coverage beyond your limit, is what is the talent? What's the backbone of that coverage going to really provide you? And if you don't know about that, if that wasn't part of the discussion that you had when your broker helped you execute cyber coverage, pick up the phone and call them and go, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Broker, what do I do if I get that email or get that phone call? What are the resources that you and my carrier are bringing to the table as a result of this relationship? All right, Trey, next slide, please. So last but not least, and I think this is the most important piece, is you need partners. I know that for me, I've always talked about the stool approach. Every company needs so many legs within their stool. They need a great banker that's helping them identify what are those risks to help mitigate and reduce, such as positive pay, other controls that you have within your disposal. They need IT tech like Trey and Craig to talk about what are the things like, MFA and those other tools that are out there to help, again, create internal controls. You need a great attorney to help you from a legal perspective. You need a great accountant. You need a great broker. it really comes down to who are the people that you call when you are thinking ahead and you're working on your business continuity plan. You guys, if you don't have a cyber continuity plan, you need to work on that. At the very end of this, which I believe Robert's going to send this out to everyone attending, there's a link to a cyber checklist that Gallagher has created. It's an opportunity for you to go out there and answer these questions and go, okay, do we know what the controls are that we have? Do we understand how they work? For those that have recently went through a cyber renewal, it used to be that a cyber application was like 8 to 10 questions, maybe 15. Now they're upwards of 700 questions. If you need a $50 million or $100 million, so this is no longer just, simple dynamic information. And if you can't answer those questions on your own, you really need a great partner to help walk you through what are the controls that you need to focus on today. All right, so with that, Robert, I think I'm going to turn it over to you for Q&A.
All right, I'm going to hit y'all rapid fire. I got a lot of questions, so quick answers are good answers. A couple of just notes I made to be funny at the beginning is, wow, this is a big deep fake dark web industry. Are there CFO opportunities within some of these dark web companies? They're probably highly profitable, and I have fantastic cash flow management skills. So that's just a note for any of the bots or hackers listening. Number two is, are on the dark web, can they change my undergraduate GPA? If that's possible. I could be interested in that. I may talk to your IT team about a link. Real question is, how are they paying for this? What form of financial tool do you pay on the dark web? I mean, imagine they don't take Visa.
Yeah, they don't. And to go back to what Michelle just said a second ago, not only do you have to figure out who to call, but you have to figure out how to pay. And usually that is with cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or something like that. And I've never personally bought Bitcoin, and I'm sure the majority of your audience probably has never done it either. So there's a workflow there that is unfamiliar to most people as well. And that is just one additional layer of complexity that makes you need to reach out to a trusted partner.
A bunch of comments around this is accountants kind of always at 11-10 paranoid, and this is like got us at a level 11 paranoid. So I hear you. And Trey and I were talking, Michelle and I were talking before this presentation started about the AI clone voice and video has got me personally paranoid because I've got 5 years of these videos. I've probably said every word in the English language, how easy it would be to deep fake video and audio and set up a Teams meeting with somebody in accounting and ask them to do something. I don't think we're too far away from that. And I know they're getting sophisticated. Just a few years ago, true story, when I posted on LinkedIn, I was going to a conference and the CEO posted that he was going to a conference. Somebody started emailing the accounting department saying, hey, this is the CEO. Hey, Robert, I know we're both about to get in a plane. Hey, accounting, can you send this wire? So this is a job for people. They're professional. It's not just random emails, low level. This is higher level stuff now. And then Trey and Michelle, you kind of spoke to this about how it's not just large companies. And I wanted to say, I wonder if small and mid-sized companies are more at risk. If I was a nefarious actor, I would avoid the big companies and I would just go after mid-market firms because they don't have the resources. So who's getting hit the most? Who's most at risk?
I think that's shifted, and I want to hear Michelle's answer too, because she understands it from the insurance side. But my answer is that a few years ago, it was the larger companies. The opportunity was larger because their revenues were larger. But those threats have moved fast downstream because smaller companies usually don't have the infrastructure, the systems, the processes, the revenues in place to implement all the things that they needed to do. keep up with the speed at which these threats are moving to smaller companies. So I absolutely think that's true. I'd be curious what Michelle says about that.
We're absolutely seeing that. In the beginning, it was really about ransom payments. And so they were hitting the billion-dollar corporations because they knew they had the capital to pay. Now what we're seeing is while ransom payment is still relevant, it's more about what is the data that we can get and the revenue we can gain by selling that data somewhere else. So they are hitting more mid-market companies. I mean, we're seeing 10 and 15 million revenue companies being hit because they may get a $250,000 ransom payment, but if they can get access to all of the companies that you sell to, all of your suppliers, now they're going to mine you for other targets to hack.
That leads me to the next question is, if you pay, do they give you your stuff back and leave? Is there honor among thieves?
Absolutely. There was a situation a month ago where a hacking circle accidentally hacked a children's hospital. The name did not indicate that they were actually a children's cancer center. When it became apparent that that's what they'd done, they actually ceased everything, let everything go, and published a public apology for accidentally hacking a children's cancer treatment center. So yes, there is honor among thieves because they know the minute that they don't keep their word to release the information, no one will ever pay them again.
Somebody asked on an application last year, the underwriter did a third-party scan of their systems. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. So for example, we give access, BitSite is a website that you can join, anyone can become a member, and it looks at data hacking from just a basic website perspective. So BitSite is a very frequent site that underwriters are using for that. I will tell you that that's why coming to the conversation equipped is important, because if you're engaging with a group like Craig or someone similar, they're doing that for you, identifying gaps so that you can go to the underwriter and say, I understand this third party may show that we have a gap, but here are all the ways we've already addressed it with our own partnership.
This is a general question I have, but it certainly applies to the cyber applications as they've gotten to the 800 questions, like you said. If in partnering with my IT team, I don't know the answer to the question, what happens when I leave an answer on an application, a business insurance application, blank?
So it depends on what the question is. In some cases, they'll just simply come back to you and ask for clarification. Worst case scenario is they're going to assume that you don't have whatever that's asking for, and you're going to pay for that. You're going to pay either in increased premium or in reduced coverage, which is why it's important that your broker is understanding the work that you are doing internally so that you are getting credit for that work from an underwriting perspective, but you're going to pay for it one way or the other.
Speaking of coverage, I've got a question around coverage limits and that getting some pushback on amounts over 5 million. What are your thoughts around coverage limits?
So when we look at limits, first of all, we start with benchmarking, where I'm able to look at companies by industry and top line revenue and look at what companies of that similar size and industry are buying. So if the average company that's 100 million in IT is buying 10 million and you want to buy 50 million, an underwriter is going to give pushback. Why do you want such excess coverage? And it becomes a conversation. Beyond that, the only time you should see a pushback on limits is if you just don't have the internal controls sufficient enough to justify it. They're only going to take that risk if you're doing your part to mitigate and reduce. So if you've not done the activities to make them feel comfortable with a risk of that size, they're not going to offer you a limit of that coverage.
Can you, if you have a project specific or client specific requirement, can you get additional coverage just for one customer or client with cyber insurance like you can other types of business insurance like general liability?
There's not a carve off, if you will. So you can use that to request a higher limit, but it's not going to be a temporary limit. You're not going to be able to get an extra $50 million for 6 months. It's going to be an annualized policy, which is why strategy is important. Sitting down with our clients at least every few months and saying, tell me what's on the horizon, help me ensure that your coverage is growing with your exposure is vital. If your broker's calling you 30 days before renewal and saying, hey, send me financials, I'll get you a package, they're doing a huge disservice, because the goal would be to see that coming well in advance of it arriving.
Trey, any changes regarding remote work and cybersecurity? Anything less or more secure? Any new or different things we should be doing as we have more remote hybrid flex workers?
So we're seeing an increase because of the remote workforce, that if you don't have multi-factor authentication or MFA, carriers are refusing to provide you coverage, period. It's not, we're going to reduce it. It is, I'm sorry, we're not interested in providing you coverage policy for that. And that has really increased in large part due to the remote workforce and making sure that people have, some backup plan to the fact that the same laptop that they're working on, they're also doing Instagram and TikTok and everything else.
Trey, your thoughts?
I agree. I think companies are trying to do two things at once. They're trying to gain the productivity gains from remote workforce and taking care of their employees, but also trying to do that in a way that is secure. And it's not always easy to balance those two needs. So yes, I mean, Michelle mentioned MFA. I think maybe the next thing on the horizon is what's called XDR, which is endpoint management and protection of just managing all these endpoints, because there may be multiple devices per employee when you add mobile phones, desktops, laptops. I think that's probably very soon to hit the cyber application requirements. So yes, there is a lot going on in the industry to accommodate the remote workforce.
Trey, I just saw a headline. I've not read this, but it seemed interesting. I've started seeing this around CFO circles. IT related cyber. This is like the chief information officer, sort of human-centric security design. And have you seen anything about that? And what's the summary of what is human-centric security design?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of tools out there for cybersecurity, a lot of software. There's even a lot of AI-powered software. I think the missing gap is having actual human beings running and automating that software, because you do need some human capital intelligence to run these tools and to set them up correctly. You can have a company move to the cloud, but doing it wrong actually leaves you more vulnerabilities than you're even expecting by not even doing it to begin with. The human-centric approach is combining trained cybersecurity expertise with the right tools and designing sort of a holistic solution for companies to implement.
I normally try to tell other CFOs, hey, don't be the chief no officer. Trey, I feel like sometimes the CIO is the chief yes officer, just like, yeah, we'll spend it. It's like unlimited budgets. And so maybe this is an unfair frame, but if the CIO is the chief yes officer, but we want him to be like a value creator, how would you coach up a CIO to like, hey, talk about some value creation with the CFO, with this investment that you want to make? Like, how should CIOs be thinking, and not just, approving everything, spending every dollar on every new widget?
Well, the CIO has a hard responsibility of asking for an ever increasing budget almost every year, right? Because this is an evolving industry that isn't sleeping. I think the flip side, the positive side of that equation is understanding that good cybersecurity and good risk management for cyber is a value add, because it's essentially an element of the trust that your clients put in your brand, essentially. So as you increase the trust, it's going to increase your retention for clients, potentially increase your value proposition for whatever you're selling. So it is a loss GAAP, it is a risk mitigation tool to protect revenue, but I think it can be a revenue enhancer too. And then again, I'd add, going back to what Michelle said about M&A, it's protecting and enhancing value too of the entire enterprise, because essentially, one day you're going to sell that enterprise or transition that enterprise, and you want to make sure that the value is there. And some people will pay a higher multiple to know that the assets under control are more protected than a competitor that they could buy.
I got 10 more questions, but I'm going to hold because I just noticed we're running up on time. So I'm going to hold these 10 and then I'm going to hit you boom, 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 rapid fire at the end.
Sure. Let me move quickly into something that Michelle said that I think is a good transition. She talked about sort of the stool analogy, and this ties back into what we're presenting today, which is sort of a 3-tiered defense for cybersecurity risk management. The third, just to regroup real quick after the questions, the first was making sure you're taking advantage of your banking fraud controls. You absolutely should be doing that. The second is everything that Michelle said about transferring that risk to the appropriate insurance carrier and the appropriate insurance partner. The third is what we do at CRAG, which is actually implementing the security controls, the technical security controls inside the organization that keep you protected and actually mitigate the cyber threats. And going into all of the different software tools, systems, processes is well beyond the scope of this call. I really want to focus on one thing that I think precedes all of that. And it's really a decision that I think a lot of people on your call are going to have to make inside their organization. And it's really a decision about how much attention are they wanting to devote to cybersecurity. Attention is defined as basically being able to focus on core information without distraction. But I think the big takeaway is attention is limited in terms of capacity and duration. You only have so much, and you can only do it for so long. And so before a company is ready to decide, well, what do we actually implement for our cybersecurity strategy? I think the question and the decision that they need to think about first is this sort of idea of what percentage of our attention can we really expect to devote to cybersecurity? And the reason I frame it that way is because what I see in a lot of middle market companies, again, going back to the discussion of smaller companies being attacked more frequently, there is usually an IT director who is tasked with the joint responsibility with maybe the CFO to fill in that 700 question application that Michelle mentioned, and then implement a security strategy. Well, the unfortunate part is that the IT director has a really difficult job, because not only is he supporting the infrastructure in that organization, but he's supporting the employees and the IT and all that. Bottom line is, it is not fair probably to ask an IT director to give 100% of his attention, his or her attention, to cybersecurity when they have to give that attention to supporting the IT infrastructure at the same time. So the question is, if you buy into sort of the threat assessment that we laid out at the beginning of this call, companies, the decision they need to make is, do we need a 100% attention giver to this problem? And if the answer is yes, that probably looks like, in today's world, at least one dedicated FTE, plus the tools they need to do so, fully dedicated to cybersecurity. If you do that, then I think the next decision that you need to make is, okay, where do we spend the dollars to invest properly in that FTE to maximize our security? And it's ultimately going to be a decision of, do you insource that expertise and that attention, or do you outsource it? And that's what we are. We're an outsourced solution for that problem. And we can go into all kinds of different benefits between outsourcing versus insourcing. But I think this is kind of the crucial step in the stage that a lot of middle market companies are dealing with, is how much attention do we give cybersecurity? And if you're giving less than 100%, you should probably be expecting less than 100% sort of peace of mind for what's actually out there threatening your entity, your business. Again, we are a cybersecurity company. Our job is to help implement the security controls that are required by some of these insurance policies, that are required by some of the compliance requirements that our clients are dealing with, and ultimately that keep your organization safe. I'm not going to go into all of those tools, but that's what we do. And we would be happy to talk to clients who are trying to figure this out, because there's just too much out there that's moving too fast. But again, I think the key step here is the attention that companies need to decide how much they want to give to this problem. With that, I think we have time for more questions. Is that right, Robert?
I'm gonna hit you 10 questions in 10 minutes. Question number one. This question popped up when you talked about disgruntled IT, current or former employees. Talk to me about access audits and how or who should we be doing access audits? Who has access to what in the system, and who's maybe accessed large amounts of something? What is the role of it? Should there be something around access audits?
You should be performing access audits, not only who has access, but what do they have access to? That includes a full roster of, what kind of software is your company using? There are a lot of companies that have outdated software. There's a lot of companies that don't know they're running particular types of software that they thought they had shelved many years ago. So that's one. The other is who has access to that software and those systems. That can be done internally, or third parties like ourselves can help you audit who has those controls. And there are different sort of philosophical decisions about what you need to make about how often you want to give access to systems and when you want to cut those off. And an IT director is probably well-versed in helping their organization do that. But that is a critical component to sort of the initial assessment of where you are in your strategy.
You said person.
I was going to say, can I add something to that really quick? So access audits are important beyond just, potential hacking. It's for, as you have disgruntled employees leaving. Recently, there was a case of an employee using email calendar invites to send confidential information from themselves to their home email rather than emailing it to themselves. They knew email would be tracked, but they never expected that adding it as a calendar attachment would get caught. So it helps you from a competitive nature as well if you have employees leaving.
They can also save it as a draft in their email account. Got to watch that too. Tools. You mentioned got to have a person and tools. What about cybersecurity platform consolidation? That's one thing I hear IT professionals complain. There's so many tools. There's so many things they're tracking. Are there some decent consolidation tools to help make it more efficient when you're trying to be good at cybersecurity?
Well, I'm biased here. I come from an outsourced solution, right? So the analogy that we sometimes use with clients is if you decide to take a trip to Europe from the US and you decide you want to plan that trip yourself, that's perfectly fine. And there are plenty of options to do so, but it doesn't take very long to get overwhelmed with all the variables that you need to balance with, transportation, where you want to visit, where you want to eat. And sometimes you finally decide, what, I'm not an expert at this. I'm willing to pay an expert, a travel agent, to do this on my behalf. That's where the consolidation comes in, when you partner with somebody who consolidates those tools for you. There are some consolidation tools out there, but again, this is a fast-moving industry, and it's really hard to kind of keep up as your own entity what you should be installing and using as an organization. And it gets expensive too, because software is not cheap. So the best way to consolidate is probably to have a third party do some of that consolidation for you. That would probably be the best approach.
Trey, any key 1 or 2 KPIs that we should be asking the CIO to report up to the rest of the leadership, to us as peers, but also to the board? Any key KPIs, 1 or 2, that you think are the most interesting to look at a whatever cadence?
I think, a couple things come to mind. The first is there are benchmarks, and Michelle may be able to answer this better as well. But there are benchmarks on your spend in IT by revenue, by industry, right? So certain industries are going to be different. But I would begin to carve out the spend of IT specific to security. I don't see a lot of companies doing that. They say we're spending X dollars as a percent of revenue based, against our competitors. But what of that spend is actually allocated to cybersecurity? I think that's going to need to be a KPI to watch so that you actually know, number one, what is your return on that investment, because it is a component of your spend. But how does that match up to what your competitors are doing? I think it's a talking point for their clients too. Just say, look, we're passionate about being protected and protecting your information as one of our clients. We're increasing our spend year over year in this category. I don't know how Michelle might answer that, but
I agree completely. The problem is when you look at a P&L, insurance gets lumped together, and it's really not broken out from a standpoint of what is the ROI of the dollars that we're spending. Robert, you asked a question earlier of how do you help a CIO showcase the value of that, 6-7 figure spend that they're doing every year. And it really comes down to take your top line number, divide it by 365, get a daily revenue number. On average, at minimum, you're going to be shut down 10 operating days before you can gain access back from a hacker. Minimum. What's that dollar amount? I can promise you it is much larger than you're going to pay in an insurance premium on the cyber side. But I think breaking it out and saying, all right, this is what we're spending on property, management liability, cyber, product recall, actually have an itemized list of where the money's going, helps you determine where we should increase the budget.
A couple follow-up insurance questions that have popped up. One is cyber regulations coverage. I don't know anything about that. So what do you know about cyber regulations coverage?
So it depends on the sector that you're doing business in. So for example, if you're doing Department of Defense work, they have very specific coverage requirements that are in place, along with limit requirements that if you don't meet them, you're not considered a viable vendor for their business. More and more, we're seeing contract language around cyber coverage. So we're seeing it both from the standpoint of supplier to buyer. What is that going to look like? Manufacturer to distributor. How are you using contract language to define and defer risk from a cyber, hacking perspective? It's just really good. It's a good practice to understand what you're responsible for across the board. But again, governmental and Department of Defense, they absolutely are going to have requirements.
Seems like different countries have different requirements and significantly different costs. Can you talk a little bit about global coverage for global businesses, or if you're thinking about expanding to Europe as an example, anything to highlight in the insurance area, Michelle or Trey, from a business perspective, if anybody's decided, hey, in the strategy session, we decided to go global, anything does that highlight any big insurance bubble or cybersecurity bubble? Michelle, maybe first.
Yeah, absolutely. Every country brings with it very unique risks. So if you're going to Europe as a whole, you're probably not going to see the same risks as if you're going to, countries in Asia. So the country itself is really going to drive how much risk we're seeing, because it depends so much on the infrastructure that's going to be available in that country. You can have the best cyber controls here in the US possible, but if the corporate infrastructure at the country that you're developing into isn't there, there's nothing that cyber is going to be able to do to help you with that.
Yeah, I would add, it's just really about exposure. You're exposing, Michelle touches on the insurance, where we would focus would be just the infrastructure. Where do the assets sit, hardware, what software is being used? Probably, global expansion means new clients that you need to kind of reassess their own risk there as well. You're spreading out expertise, IT professionals and administration professionals. So exposure changes when you cross not only state lines, but also oceans. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Any exclusions popping up in maybe the most recent cyber insurance policies that we need to be looking out for? We need to have conversations with our broker about anything they're trying to sneak in as an exclusion that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, we're seeing a ton of exclusions being added, frankly, across all coverage areas. There is an increase with just what is the responsibility of each employee. For example, we're seeing things where if you don't have continuity plans in place and you disclose that you do in the application, they're going to exclude coverage. Basically, if you say in an application that you have or are actively using anything, and at the point of claim, it is determined that you are not actively using it or deploying it, you can expect there to be no coverage in most cases or extremely limited coverage. So we're seeing a lot more exclusionary language around the applications themselves.
Gotten several questions around training, so I'll hit you both with it. Trey, from like the perspective of an outside partner, a trusted advisor, what's the role of training to employees, the people side of business? Michelle, can you talk a little bit about what might be available as training tools if somebody isn't wise enough or isn't big enough or doesn't have a third party partner? Are there tools within the carrier around training? Trey, I'll start with you on this one. Can you talk a little bit about the people side of this and the importance of training?
Training is still very important, primarily because the high majority of cyber incidents are still triggered by social engineering processes. Someone clicking on an email, a phishing email, clicking a link or an attachment, convincing someone to do so. There's a social element there that certainly, AI powered systems can weed out some of those things, but they're not going to catch everything. So training is critical. And I have talked to clients who I would put this in the category of sort of back to what I said about attention, because the clients who are taking cybersecurity serious are embedding a culture in their organization that incorporates training and are taking it seriously. And they're actually welcoming sort of the new trend where, hey, look, if you click on a test email, a simulation, so to speak, you're forced to take a 5 or 10 minute training scenario or watch a video. Most employees, they hate to do that, but companies are taking it seriously. I met with a client recently. Their policy was, you click on that 3 times. If you fail 3 times, the 4th time you are out. So they took it very seriously. I'm not necessarily saying that that's the right policy, but that company did a good job of supplementing that policy with good training behind the lines on sort of a quarterly basis to make sure we have some programs and software that will help companies implement that training as well.
Well, this was fantastic. Michelle, I'm cutting you off. You're not even going to get to answer because Trey crushed it with that. This has been wonderful. What a great reminder that we need to mitigate risk, right? With external partners, level up the team, partners like Trey at Craig. And then once you've done that, you've mitigated risk. You need to transfer what's left over that's just small and have partners like Michelle with business insurance. And if you have awesome partners like this, it levels up your entire team. And I always think of this. Some CFOs can be hesitant, but I had a really wise IT manager said, "Hey, Robert, don't you have a bunch of really smart accountants?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "And then you're a pretty smart accountant." I was like, "Some say, yeah." And then you close the books and double check everyone's work. I was like, "Yeah." And then you do it again at the end of the year. I was like, "Yeah." And then you pay someone to double check what you all did. And I said, "Yeah." She's like, "Yeah, don't you think we should have a third-party assessment of our IT system and do a gap assessment and maybe have a check and have like an outside partner to phone a friend with questions?" I was like, "Okay, the PO's approved." So think about it like that, folks. We got external auditors and we need our IT partners. We need the IT friends need to phone a friend too. So Trey, thank you for being that friend. Michelle, thank you for being that partner. This was wonderful. I will pass out your contact information, presentation, links to this recording, a bunch of stuff. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.